Hello and welcome to the That's So Craven podcast, your Fulham podcast from Down Under. We're here today to discuss Fulham playing Wolves this weekend. Well, Friday night, in fact. A big game for both teams, more so for Fulham, though, as they sit just outside the top five. A win takes us past the 40-point mark, which is the intended mark for safety, although I think we can safely say that we are safe from relegation, which is a lovely feeling to have with 15 games still to go in the season. Here to discuss it with me, I have Elton. How are we going today?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Good to be here.
So let's get straight into it. Fulham playing Wolves this weekend, Friday night game under lights at Craven Cottage. Dad, how do you see this one playing out, and how do you see how Fulham are going so far this season now that we're sort of coming off the back of that smash and grab against Brighton?
I mean, it shouldn't be a game we're concerned about, but obviously we're somewhat under our own pressure to now keep the momentum up and keep acquiring points, because our sixth position is wonderful, but I guess little precarious, because we've got quite a lot chomping at our heels, and the teams above us aren't exactly going to be dropping lots of points and giving us an opportunity to overtake them. So the pressure is kind of a different sort of pressure. We're very used to a relegation pressure, and that's been I guess the focus of nearly everyone's attention for so long now. But I really think it's quite funny, and I had to laugh when you mentioned that we think 40 points is now the safety zone. Surely we don't have to have this conversation anymore. surely we are safe.
Well, it's an interesting one, because Marco Silva has always said, avoid relegation. That's our aim for the season. And I mean, mathematically, I think you could still go down with 40 points. I've seen a table that I think it's Cottage Analytica put on Twitter every week after we play, after the whole weekend's worth of fixtures, and it's basically a graph showing our progress through the season, and it's great to see how far ahead we are of our best ever season. But that sort of mathematical point where we are officially safe is still actually sitting up at about 60 points. So mathematically we're not safe, but in terms of historical data, I think we are safe now, and we can probably stop talking about it. And I don't know if you saw a little interview with Bobby Reid during the week where he sort of said, the guys in the camp are thinking about Europe. Like, it's actually on the table now. And I know we're constantly saying safety first, 40 points. But it is definitely a conversation that they're having within the camp that we've all been having for a long time now. So there is definitely a shifting mindset at the moment, which is kind of good. But it's a good point you pick up that, this is an important game, because the teams below us, if you look at the table itself, you see Fulham sitting on 38 points. Brighton, Liverpool and Brentford all have games in hand over us, and they're all on 35 points. So they're just 3 points behind us at the moment. That's one win with Brighton and Liverpool both have 2 games in hand. Brentford have 1 game in hand. So it's not like we're sitting pretty in 6th at the moment and we're miles ahead of the pack. If you lose games like this, which we should be winning, you really do drop off, and you can drop down the table quite quickly. We could easily slip to 9th this weekend if we lose and Brighton, Liverpool and Brentford all get good results, which is very possible. So we do have to make sure we keep on picking up points in these games, because we don't want to slip down the table. And, I think even just mentally, it's good to see yourself sitting in 6th constantly. If you're sitting in 9th, it feels much more of a mid-table position. But, we're 3 points off 5th, 4 points off 4th. We have to start thinking about a European push at the very least, because we're in a position to do so. There's only 14 games left this season. I don't see why you wouldn't push to actually go for a European spot and make these games even more important than the ones against the Big Six.
It's really important, and I think we're no different to every single Fulham fan, possibly everyone in the Fulham camp, to look at that table, absolutely delight in the fact that we are 6th, really enjoy it, enjoy the success that we're having, and sort of almost manifest the fact that we are there, we deserve to be there, the numbers don't lie, we didn't steal any points, although Brighton might argue, but we didn't actually technically nick any points. We earned all of them fairly and squarely. There was a ref in every game. We didn't just go out and play the blind school. And so, look, we know by those games in hand that it's a slightly false position, but that's okay. It's okay. In a way, you're ahead of the pack, even though you know that they're coming for you. But you can take a view that, okay, I deserve to be there. But if I keep playing and keep actually um, picking up 3 points, they can't catch me every week. So I stay in sixth position for longer and longer and longer, and suddenly it's the first to blink or falter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about consistency now. And I said it last week. What we have done this season, above everything else, is be really consistent. And so I back us to keep doing it. We've got more depth, and I love the fact that Marco Silva manages the expectations around the team in the media and keeps talking about it from a week to week perspective, and keeps everyone else's focus on a week to week perspective, and doesn't let anyone get too carried away. If he was talking it up, trust me, the media would pick up on it, and we would be
Mm.
that team that everyone is spruiking and wanting to write about. And I think it's really smart that he keeps it completely reined in. But you have to believe that those players know better than anyone else what's going on. They can see how competitive they are when they come up
Mm.
against the top half teams, and they'll be thinking, Shh, we can do this. We can
Yeah.
absolutely do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll elaborate a little bit on a point you made there as well. The points are on the board already. We have 38 points. We're not getting points taken away from us. And the teams below actually have the pressure on them to win those games to catch up to us.
Absolutely.
The pressure
Totally.
is actually off us because we've already got the points on the board. And now it's just about continuing to get good results and at least match what the teams below us are doing. The pressure's on Brighton, Liverpool, and Brentford to actually pick up those points, because if they lose that game, they go, okay, shit, we don't have our game in hand anymore, and we're 3 points behind.
Totally.
So each game for Brentford, Liverpool, Brighton, and even Chelsea, I guess, as well, who are 7 points behind us now, the pressure's going to be there for the rest of the season to pick up
Totally.
those games. And, those games are going to be played in the coming weeks as well, depending on FA Cup fixtures, I believe. So we expect the table in a couple of weeks' time will actually be a lot more even. I don't know if you noticed, but all the teams, well, most of the teams who've played 24 games now are in the top six. You got City, United, and Tottenham Hotspurs have all played 24. So the teams above us don't have those games in hand over us anymore. And we're only 4 points behind Tottenham, having played the same number of games. And Newcastle will surely be looking over their shoulder. And a few guys from the Newcastle podcast were interacting with us a bit on Twitter, saying, we Newcastle fans are genuinely looking over their shoulder at the moment because Fulham are 3 points behind. And if Newcastle lose that game in hand, Fulham have an opportunity to actually catch up a bit of ground there. And it could be interesting going towards the end of the season as to where both of those sides stand.
Totally.
Let's skip forward anyway and look at the last time these two teams played. I'll just pull up a little image on for our live streamers here. And this is a really interesting image. And obviously, the last time we played, it was a 0-0 draw. Mitro missed a penalty late on in that game. There were chances for both sides. It was very open. But the image that I've got up on screen here of our lineup that finished the game. So, admittedly, it's manipulated a little bit. It's not our starting lineup, but the team we had out there at the end of the game. Just to sort of make a couple of points on who was out there, we had Rodak in goal and Babu at right back. We had Tyrese Francois playing through the middle. On the wings, we had Kenny and Stansfield. Now, if you told me any of those players were starting a game in the Premier League at the moment, I mean, some of them aren't even at the club anymore. 3 of them aren't at the club. They're out on loan or have left. Kearney is probably the only person who you'd expect to be there because he's quite a solid bench player for us. But Rodak is obviously second choice keeper now. It just goes to show how far we've come, and we have made mention of it a few times on the podcast recently about the depth Fulham now have, having made a couple of acquisitions. This game was mid-August, so there was still a bit of time to go in the transfer window, and we've obviously picked up a couple of players since as well. But looking at how settled this team is now, I forgot to mention Tosin at centre-back there as well. Obviously, sits on the bench more often than not, as Diop's probably the preferred centre-back partner. But, Dad, your thoughts? It's just really interesting to see. I mean, it's kind of staggering to see the team we put out. Obviously, Stansfield was having a really good start at the start of the season, but compare the wingers there of Kenny and Stansfield to Willian / Solomon / Decordova-Reid and even Wilson. I think Wilson and Solomon were both injured at this point in the season, so very, very different. Just how far have we come since the 13th of August, 2022?
Oh, tremendously. And I think perhaps the greatest net effect of all of this is the strength and depth we've got on the bench. So it's the options we have, not only from a tactical perspective to put a starting lineup together, but also the options we have as the game progresses for Silva to make a tactical change and actually make a difference. And it's you might only be talking about 3 or 4 players, but it's very, very significant. And a bit of a throwaway comment about Tosin, but honestly, Tosin being replaced by Diop has had a very, very significant effect, not only in terms of goals conceded, but in terms of the what's the right word for it? Oh, just the collective performances of our backline, and that includes Leno in that pack. It's very, very significant. I think I'm going to say that Harrison, Reed, and Polinia have also developed their game very, very significantly, and they're a very tight partnership now. We're missing Kenny Tete there in BDR on the right. We're missing the link up of Robinson and Willian on the left. These are very high functioning partnerships now. And not to mention Pereira together with the wingers and Mitro. These are enormous points of success for this Fulham team. So I think that's a really significant slide, actually, that not only reminds us of a few faces who we're either never likely to see again or we don't see virtually ever, but it's a huge change from where we were a few months ago. Massive.
I mean, I'll make the point. This isn't attempted clickbait, but I will make the point that in that game, Pereira, Cabano, Decordova-Reid, and Tete all did start. But I think the point I'm trying to make with this slide is how far we've come in terms of depth. And Babu wouldn't be there. We'd see Cedric Suarez there. Francois wouldn't be there. We'd see Lukic. Stansfield and Kearney wouldn't be on the wings. We'd have Solomon and Wilson coming on. And obviously you'd have Leno in goal as well. And well, I assume Willian and BDR would probably be starting the game. So
yeah, okay.
It's just a point to make that we're such a better unit now. I mean, this team, if you look at it like this, they're never going to be, well, I mean, they were competitive still in the Premier League, but they're never going to be world beaters, and they're not going to be playing at the same standard that the current side is playing at. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make here, is just how far we've come and how much stronger we are as a unit now, and how much better we know our starting 11 and what our strongest team is. Because I think we were still trying to work it out at the start of the season with some of the new additions, and it feels like we're very settled now. And I guess the best thing about the fact that we're so settled is we're seeing consistency because of that as well. So it's just something I wanted to raise. And, that game we played against Wolves last time was quite scrappy. There were quite a few big chances for Wolves that they missed. They've missed a couple of open goals that they should have scored in. They've lost a few players since then as well. I know Gibbs White was playing for them, and so was Dendonka. They've obviously moved. I think Gibbs White's at Nottingham Forest now. He was one of their most dangerous players on the day as well, from memory. And Dendonka's moved to Aston Villa as well. So there's been a few changes for them, and I expect the team that played that day will be very different to the team we expect to see on Friday night as well. Let's have a quick look at the last 5 for both teams. Obviously, we know Fulham on a really good run at the moment, unbeaten in the last 5. In the league, unbeaten in the last 3 and having conceded no goals as well. 3 clean sheets in a row in the league is outstanding. I had a quick look, and in the last 9 league games, which is since the World Cup, Fulham have conceded just 4 goals. Now, for a side, I remember in the early podcast, when we started this podcast back in October, November kind of time, we were really worried about the defence because we were leaky. We were having a lot of games where we'd have to score 3 goals to get a result, and still conceding 2 most weeks. It's a very, very different story now. And then looking at Wolves, they had obviously a really good result against Liverpool. The Southampton result, they did go down to 10 men, still got a 2-1 win, but it was a pretty scrappy game. And obviously Southampton in terrible form at the moment. I think they sacked their manager straight after that game. But, they've had a couple of tough games as well against Man City and Liverpool, and recently lost to Bournemouth, who are also struggling in the league. That was a bit of a smash and grab from Bournemouth that week. Dad, your thoughts on the form of the two sides going into this one? Obviously, Fulham sitting much higher up the table than Wolves. But do you think those wins against Southampton and Liverpool will give Wolves a bit of a boost, especially coming off the back of a disappointing loss to Bournemouth?
I think the 3-0 victory over Liverpool is astonishing, really. And I never watched that game, so I don't know much about what happened there. But it's an outlier, and it certainly jumps out at me for where Wolves are actually sitting and what their overall achievement is. So that's it tells you that, well, firstly, they can score 3 goals in a game against a pretty handy side. And I know I've heard that Liverpool were terrible on that day, but you still got to get, 3 goals past a Premier League defence. So that's not a nothing result. And so I guess that's in my vision at the moment. But look, I think I'm not anxious. Our form is really good. We're consistent. We have a lot of options. A ton of options in midfield. I love the fact that we're having this regular and very active discussion at the moment about who should start. And Manor Solomon, I have to keep reminding myself that is the correct pronunciation of his name. But look, our form's great at the moment. Our only concern is a non-firing and now injured Mitro, which of course we'd love to have him back and on all 4 cylinders, or maybe 8 cylinders. But I think it would be at home. It would have to be a very, very major misfire for Wolves to cause us huge problems. Never say never, but that would be my feeling. And I'd certainly be opening my betting app with that in mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we look at the season so far, I'll just pop across to the table. Fulham with 11 wins, sitting in 6th, 5 draws, 8 losses, a goal difference of +5 so far this season. One of the best things, and it doesn't really reflect in the table at the moment, is Fulham have 8 clean sheets, which I believe is right up there now. And, I think Nick Pope and maybe De Gea and Edison are the only ones who are sort of higher than that, and Ramsdale as well. But we're talking about top 4 sides having the same number of clean sheets or slightly better number of clean sheets than us. That's a really massive improvement, considering how not poor our defence was at the start of the season, but how leaky we were at the start of the season. To get up to 8 clean sheets now is a really, really good effort. Looking at the lower half of the table, we see Wolves obviously sitting in 15th there. 6 wins, 5 draws, 12 losses. The big thing to point out there is their goal difference, -15. Now, Wolves have only scored 17 goals so far this season. That's the equal lowest with Everton, and potentially Nottingham Forest as well have scored, I think, 18, maybe 17. That to me is a massive talking point going into this game, considering um, how good Fulham's defence have been so far, and the fact that Wolves are really struggling to score goals. Um, Dad, do you think we're likely to see Wolves nick a goal in this one? I know it's obviously hard to say because if we could predict results, we'd be millionaires. But based on the fact that Wolves have struggled throughout this season to score goals, I did raise with you earlier that Daniel Pedence and Ruben Neves both have 5 goals each for Wolves. And then across the rest of their team, they've only got a handful of players who've scored more than 1 goal this season. Compare that to Fulham, who have 12 individual goal scorers in the league this year and seem to be scoring not for fun, but at least putting away goals fairly comfortably. Do we feel like Wolves are going to struggle to score against a defence that's looking really, really solid at the moment?
I think I look at it the other way and go back to that first Sunderland fixture in the cup, and I know we didn't have a full strength team out there, but one small concentration, failure from Diop allowed their winger to nick the ball and hit the net. So tell me that any side in the bottom half of the table could not score a goal against us. Not true.
Yeah,
It could happen. It could happen. One piece of brilliance or one just one mistake, one little lapse in concentration is enough at this level. Absolutely. So I think you look at the stats and you look at our run of clean sheets. I'm not going to say it's impressive, but it's really, really encouraging, and it means that there's no fluke in that. So you start to believe that we can probably continue to do that. You'd have to back us to continue to do that, and certainly against a lower, what are they, the 6th lowest side. You wouldn't expect us to. We might drop a goal, but it'd be really difficult to imagine us dropping a couple of goals. And then you go to a Fulham capable of scoring a couple of goals to stay in the game. I think in our last 5 games we haven't scored more than 2 goals in the league, and it's you have to go back a long way to Fulham scoring more than 3 goals in the Premier League this season, right? So we're not a high scoring team, which always leaves you vulnerable to someone nicking a goal against you and really putting you on the back foot, particularly if it happens early in the first half. That's a nightmare scenario for me every time. And so I'm always looking for an early goal from this Fulham team because we're not a high scoring team. Looking for an early goal in the first half because I think it settles us and changes us completely. If we got a goal against, I'm going to say, if we got a goal against Wolves in the first half, we can manage that. They're not going to catch us.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. I think a lot hangs on a couple of things in terms of selection and the way we play out the game. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we go onto the lineups. In fact, let's just jump onto the lineups now. Now, I've popped an expected lineup out on the live stream. Now, I've switched out Mitro for Vinicius. Now, we did get a bit of news that Mitro had a bit of a hammy complaint, which obviously kept him out of the last game. We did see some vision of him doing some individual training at Motspur Park, but I would expect that he'd miss this game. And we're likely to see Vinicius start, considering the impact that Vinicius had when he came off the bench and how ineffective Decordova-Reid was up front. Again, nothing against him. He was being asked to play completely out of position, which he's been asked to do multiple times this season, but it just didn't work. I expect we'll see Vinicius up front. Usually we'd be baying for Manor Solomon. I'm thinking if I don't predict him in the lineup, maybe he'll actually get picked for once. But I'm expecting we'll probably see Willian and Decordova-Reid start on the wings, and the rest of the team I expect will be exactly the same, unless for some reason Marco sees a need for Tosin over Diop, which he has mentioned that there is a tactical decision there every week. I just don't know what that tactical decision actually is. So they're the only changes I expect. Do you see anything different there? Would you expect Solomon to come into the lineup?
Oh, I think he's pressing so hard. Um,
Absolutely.
there must be a little thing in the back of the management's mind that come the end of the season, there's a discussion with Manor Solomon. I'm going to force you guys to say his name properly.
I'm just going
Manor
to keep saying
Solomon.
Solomon because that's always right.
Yeah, it probably isn't. You know, it's probably some Israeli
Solomon.
pronunciation, which is which is not even Solomon either. But he's pressing so hard, being very respectful, but pressing so hard for a start. Every fan in the Fulham locker, if that's a word or expression, wants him to start. He's so exciting. Everyone loves him at the moment. But gee, Willian's not so bad either. What a great situation to be in. And I'm thinking there comes a point where if we don't start him, and he's a bench player for Fulham, how's that going to sit when he is looking for first team starting status as part of his contract to stay at the club at some point? You know, I don't know. I look, and I think we love what Bobby Decordova-Reid is doing on the right hand side. But if I had to lose Bobby Decordova-Reid, I'm not talking about the future here in terms of longevity, but if I had to choose between Bobby Decordova-Reid in my side over Willian, I'm picking Willian. And why can't Willian start on the right and Manor Solomon start on the left?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, look, I won't answer those questions straight away because we do have a few questions coming later in the podcast, and they do relate a little bit to Solomon. But I mean, one thing to mention, I guess, Solomon, he's in the last 2 games, he's only played maybe 15 minutes if you include injury time, because he's come on around the 80th minute both times, and he scored 2 goals in that amount of time. He is knocking on the door now. And, you know, you have to remember this is a guy who was starting for Shakhtar, keeping Mudryk out of the team, who cost Chelsea 60, 80 million, whatever it was, and was playing in the Champions League and scoring goals against Real Madrid. So sitting on the bench, you'd assume, is not the place that he wants to be. And we do need to consider that at the end of the season, he goes back to Shakhtar. He's only with us for the season. He then has only 6 months on his contract. We can sign him on a pre-contract at that point or pay Shakhtar money. Hopefully we just do whatever we can to get him locked in and he's enjoying his time at Fulham. But to enjoy it even more, if he was a starter, you know, it seems obvious that we should be doing everything we can to keep him happy because he's such a talented player. And the other thing to consider is Willian is in amazing form at the moment and playing so well, but he's not going to be with us for 6 more years. Whereas someone like Solomon is young and has the ability to be a Fulham player for a long time into the future if we keep him happy and we keep performing. So there is something to think about there in terms of the future as well. But look, I fully expect Marco to keep it the way it is. I'd say Willian and Bobby are both in need of a rest fairly soon as well. So I wouldn't be overly surprised to see either of them get rested at some point in the next few games. But, you know, there's important games coming up against Arsenal. If we pick up any points against Arsenal, they're really important for the rest of the season. So it may be that we actually look at resting Willian in games like this. An interesting point from Steve here, who's following along on our live stream on YouTube. Steve says, remember that Willian's contract is also up at the end of the season. Obviously, Willian seems to be incredibly happy at Fulham. I know he owns a restaurant in the area. When you get to this age, similar to Tim Ream, you start to get into the realm of rolling contracts where you just constantly keep signing for another 12 months. I don't see it being likely that we'll put Willian on like a 2 or 3 year deal. If he's happy where he is and we're happy to have him keep playing, then I think we'll sign him up for another 12 months. I can't see him moving to another club. I know there was news that came out that he was incredibly sought after in the January transfer window, and a couple of teams in the top 6 actually came asking after him, and his agent said he's really happy where he is and he doesn't want to leave. So I'm hoping at the end of the season it's the same story as well. But, with Willian and Solomon both effectively no longer Fulham players at the end of the season, you have to tread a bit of a fine line there, I think. And it's something the management definitely have to consider.
So I think Marcus Silva's admission that the Bobby Decordova-Reid experiment at striker was not successful, and Mitro's almost certain exclusion through injury says that Vinicius probably starts. I think that's almost a shoe-in. You mentioned Tosin for Diop. Whatever Silva says in press conferences, I see little evidence that there's a rotation policy between Tosin and Diop. I think Diop is now preferred regardless of the opposition.
Yeah, I don't think it's rotation. I think Marco said it's tactical. Diop carries the ball well, but I think Tosin has a better range of long passing. And I think for games where we're going to be playing long, Marco does prefer Tosin because he adds that to the team. I think if you're looking at just keeping a bog standard defense and putting out our best 11, it's Diop and Ream every time. And Tosin's just for those specific instances. I know we saw him play, I think it was a Chelsea game that he came in and played. And that was purely tactical. And I mean, Marco's tactical decisions have worked all season.
What are you telling me about Harry Wilson in your lineup here?
He's not in the lineup.
I know. What are you telling me about Harry? He was last week. He started.
Yeah, look, I think he started because Decordova-Reid went up front. I think if we just started with Vinicius, then Decordova-Reid obviously starts on the right. Because there are two, at the moment at least, are starting wingers. I don't think Wilson displaces either of them. I don't think he had a terrible game, but yeah, Decordova-Reid starts comfortably over Wilson, not so comfortably over Solomon based on his current form. Because I think even Solomon out of position would be a good option compared to Decordova-Reid. I think they're probably on par when Solomon's out of position.
Polinia is leading the league table in accumulated yellow cards at the moment, apart from other things. Do you think Silva makes a tactical move in keeping his powder dry for Polinia against tougher opposition, or he plays him anyway?
Well, I won't answer that because we'll come to that in our questions a little bit later, but I'm
fully prepared, aren't I?
It is a really good point though, because we'll discuss it later, because I think it really does need a bit of discussion, and it all depends on how you think you should pick up points for the season. Do we save players for what we think are important fixtures, or do we play players just because and always put out your best team? And it also, I guess, hangs a little bit on how he sees Lukic as a backup. If he thinks Lukic is really a Polinia backup, or is he more of a Harrison Reed backup? Can we deal without Polinia for 2 games by having Lukic come into the team? We just don't know yet because he hasn't had the minutes. But I'm sure, realistically, we're going to find out within the next
no doubt
8 games. Yeah, 8 games, because at 32 games, that's when
way before
the yellow cards reset. Yeah, so
we'll
definitely see Lukic. We'll see him at some point soon, I'm sure. Moving on, the Wolves lineup. This is how Wolves lined up in their last game against Bournemouth. Fully expect them to line up in a very similar fashion. There might be a couple of changes. I know Bueno at left back is quite young, so it's possible we'll see someone else come in at left back. As mentioned, Ruben Neves is, by far and away Wolves' best player.
You might want to actually talk through the lineup, Jack. You might want to talk through the lineup here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just run through them quickly. We got Sarr in goal, Semedo, Dawson, Kilman, and Bueno. In defence, have Neves, Nunez, and Moutinho in midfield. On the wings, we have Traore and Sarabia, and then Kuna up front. Yeah, we know about Traore. He scored against us last time we were in the Premier League. Very, very fast player. Went to Barcelona, didn't impress, has come back again. We know about Ruben Neves, and I think a lot of this game is going to be down to how well Palhinha and Reed shut down Neves, because last time round he pulled the strings for the whole game, and it'll be interesting to see what we do to shut him down this time round. Moutinho, very, very accomplished midfielder as well. But like I said, they're missing goals at the moment. Neves has 5. Daniel Pedence has 5 as well. He didn't play in the last game. And then no one else has scored more than 1 goal for them this season. So they're struggling to find goal scorers. If we can cut Ruben Neves out and stop him from getting goals, he's very good from set pieces as well. But I think at that point, if we can lessen his impact on the game, we're more likely to get a result out there. So moving on, Jack's top tip. Last time round, picked the Brighton winner at $6. Won everyone a pretty penny, hopefully. I know certainly won you a few dollars. I've gone with a little multi-bet here. Fulham to win, both teams to score no, and then Andreas Pereira anytime goal scorer. I think with Mitrovic out of the team, we're going to be looking for goals elsewhere. And I think Pereira has been knocking on the door a few times recently. We saw him with a really good shot against Chelsea. We saw him hit the bar in the Forest game. I think he's looking like he's going to get goals soon. And I think this game is going to be the one. Both teams to score no. Like I said, Wolves have only scored 17 goals so far this season against the defence who are on the back of 3 clean sheets and performing really, really well at the moment. I don't see both teams scoring in this one. I only see Fulham goals. And a Fulham win. I think Fulham are, have to be considered favourites. 6th place playing 15th place. The fact that Fulham aren't out and out favourites for this, and I think are only paying $2.50 or something along those lines. I
think
just
it was
feel
less
like
than that.
It could be slightly less than that, but we're definitely not. Brighton were paying $1.60 last week. Fulham are definitely in the $2 this week. So they're saying it's going to be a lot closer than I think it personally should be. So that multi together is paying $11.50. So $10 on wins you 110 back. I think if Pereira can get that goal, this one's a banker. I don't see how Wolves are going to score, and I just feel Fulham are going to come out with this. You could probably change that anytime goal scorer. Pereira, I think, is only paying about $5 for goal scorer. Players like Willian paying about $4 will still get you around about that $10 mark for a multi-bet. So, look, for those who like a punt, I'd definitely be chucking $10 on that to win you 100. I think that's cash outable as well. So, Dad's nodding his head. I can see he quite likes that one for this weekend.
No, I'm just laughing, and I'm thinking, at what point does the Financial Securities Association actually knock on our back door and ask us to actually apply for a license?
Yeah, well, I think when I get 4 in a row right, they probably have to come knocking at some point, because there's a little bank account somewhere sitting offshore with thousands of dollars in it. Once I keep racking up these multi bets, but yeah, I mean, look, for those who like betting, obviously betting's a little bit in the news at the moment because I don't know if you saw, but I don't know the exact details, so I don't want to go into too much detail about it. But I believe the British Parliament have said that they're going to be passing a law potentially to stop shirt sponsors being betting companies going forward. They've obviously done it recently not recently, but in the past with tobacco companies and alcohol companies as well. And it looks like betting companies are finally going to be taking off shirts. That obviously we're talking about betting here. How do you feel about that? Because there's obviously a big ethical issue, and I know it got raised at the start of the season when W88 were announced as sponsors. Do you think that betting companies should be allowed to be on shirts, or do you think ethically we shouldn't be actually promoting betting? I know we're doing it on a podcast, but we're not promoting betting. Gamble responsibly.
We're not
But
promoting betting, we're just suggesting you put a tenner on it. Look,
no, look,
it's a
I'm just
difficult one,
picking
isn't
out a statistical anomalies here in
it?
sponsored by Sportsbet. But there is obviously ethical issues, and in terms of sponsorship, we're chucking out ideas about multi bets, but WATA are
I would
giving a
I
lot of
was
money to Fulham
yeah.
to be on the front of their shirt and be promoted constantly.
I thought you were going to reframe it, more silky than that, Jack, by saying that
Please do
you're
for
actually,
me.
yeah, you're actually just, you know, uh, illustrating the prevailing view in terms of statistics
It's
versus how
exactly
we
what
see
I'm
it.
doing. Exactly what I'm doing.
Whether or not you bet is by another issue. Look, full disclosure, I almost never bet. It's always funny. I only have a bet when I see a massive arbitrage and a massive, like,
You mean when I tell you to?
smoky. When my son tells me to, yeah, and so I think it's interesting, and should look smoking alcohol. I'm not going to go into a sermon on the mount here, but smoking alcohol, or so I should say tobacco, alcohol, betting, they're all fairly dodgy sort of pastimes for young children to be considered and involving in. So, and therefore, you know, when companies put their moniker on a shirt, it's highly influential to young kids. Highly influential. That's why they do it. You know,
Mhm.
it's 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 why cigarette companies forever loved putting um, their logo on a helmet, an F1 helmet, because
Yeah.
for a couple of hours of primetime TV, um, their logos out there, and the same thing on your favorite football team. It's huge profile, and time in front of a camera influences fans.
Mm.
So should little kids be influenced and encouraged to bet? Of course not. It's ridiculous. So gamble responsibly. And what was the odds again?
Yeah. Exactly. Whoops. I almost feel bad putting it out there now, but look,
No, look,
like I said,
I think we're,
it's a
I
bit
think
of a laugh.
no,
We're
I
just
think it's
showing.
seriously. I think it's more than that. I think it's really interesting because there are people who paid very handsome salaries who were literally, um, statisticians who go to incredible lengths to follow the form and put numbers on these various odds. And the multis are sometimes incredible because they just can't get it right. And I think it is really interesting to look at what the prevailing view is. If you want to have a punt, fine. We're not pushing it. No one's sponsoring this. But I think I see no great harm in it, and in what we're doing. Betting on the front of a shirt that kids buy, it's pretty questionable.
Well, look, I mean, personally, I'd prefer to see betting companies off the front of shirts purely because, I mean, kids aren't allowed it. I've got two kids now, and Um, I really liked the fact when we had World Mobile on the front of the shirt, I could buy it for Alfie and he'd have the exact same shirt as me, and he loved that. And then you buy the shirt for this season and it's blank except for a Fulham logo on it. It could literally be a shirt where you just iron on a logo, but instead you pay 10 times the price for it. Um, I would love to see shirts just have normal companies on the front that it's always going to be hard because if you dig really deep, you can always find an issue with some company. But
What, like a pharma company or a
oh,
or, or a powdered milk company or a
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. No, but you know what I mean. Just something a little bit more ethical than a betting company. But as you said, the reason we put out these little top tips are more just to look at the statistics of it all and to look at where you can sort of perceive a little bit of value because you see. it's just the odds of something actually happening, and we talk about it every week. When we
Sure.
predict results for a game,
Absolutely.
it's the odds of
Absolutely.
Fulham winning.
And we're
And we're
sticking to
just
this
looking at
line, by the way.
yeah, well, I've got to explain it away somehow. But we're looking at the odds of Fulham winning and the odds of Pereira scoring and how likely
Yep.
it is to happen. And
Sure.
at the end of the day, it's a bit of fun. Gamble responsibly. I think I've said that enough to cover our asses now. So
Yeah.
let's move on anyway. We got some questions. So we reached out on Twitter and Facebook, and to a couple of little messenger groups as well that we sit in, and we've got some really good questions this week. So let's have a run through them. And I do have an offline answer for Sam to one of the questions because I can tell it was 100% made for Sam. Let's look at this first one. How do we bring Solomon more into the game while at the same time not nullifying the beauty that is Willian? This is from Rodders on Twitter at Fulham Rod. Dad, how do we bring Solomon into the game?
Easy. You start him. Like I said before, you start him on the left. You start Willian on the right, and it's look. We've never tried what everyone believes to be the very, very obvious natural solution here. I want to see it. I really want to see it. I'm ready.
I agree with that. The one thing I'd say, I mean, obviously we don't want to nullify the beauty that is Willian. I agree with that. But in doing that, you also pull Decordova-Reid out of the side, and he's got such a good understanding with Tete. Both of them have assists this season from the right, and that's because of how well they understand each other. And Willian and Robinson also understand each other perfectly on the left at the moment as well. You are bringing Solomon into the team is disruptive is the wrong word, but it kind of is the right word as well.
Well, it is. It is.
Because it is disruptive to the system that we play. I think he can still slot into it, but these guys have played the last 24 games together and are really getting a good understanding of how they move and how they play. And we do see when players come into the team that don't regularly start, how hard it is for them to actually settle because they just everyone, this is such a tight group and everyone knows where each other's going to be at all times. They don't even have to look up most of the time. And you bring Solomon in, and I think there's a potential for a bit of disruption there. And that's my only worry with it. Solomon is incredibly talented and I'd love to see more of him. But I think that might be a little bit of an issue that we have to be a little bit careful of and we have to manage. What I will put to you, though, is...
Well, can I just say, maybe there's a massive case for leaving William on the left and saying to Solomon, because even when he does come on, they tend to float and they do swap around. And so I don't think it's out of his wheelhouse for him to appear on the right. And maybe you say to him, the opportunity is to make it your own on the right. There's also a defensive issue that Bobby and Kenny Tete bring that's working very, very well at the moment. And so, but maybe the Wolves game is the game to try it out when you don't feel like Kenny's going to be stretched and Bobby doesn't have to be assisting or being mindful of that, and so Solomon can play a little bit more freely because he's not a Bobby Decordova-Reid in terms of what he does defensively. He's not. I wouldn't say he's a lazy defender because I think he's already proved that he's gone back and done a lot of work in defence. But he's not the Bobby and Kenny Tete show.
Yeah. What I was going to say, the other consideration is we look at Tom Cairney and how we see Tom Cairney as a player who comes off the bench and influences games. Why can't Solomon be the same? I know he's probably too talented to be just a bench player who comes off the bench to influence the last 15 minutes, but is there not the possibility that he comes on a little bit earlier in games, maybe the 60th minute, for one of the wingers, and that's his role, is to come on and just provide this spark? Because we can see he comes on with 10 minutes to go and scores goals. Why not keep him as a bench player? Because he's so good off the bench. I mean, if you don't do that, if you start him and have Decordova-Reid coming off the bench, does Bobby have the same impact coming off the bench as Solomon currently does? And if not, then shouldn't Bobby start and Solomon be that bench player who can come on and change a game for you?
I can't argue with your logic. Have you got uh, an angry bird in the background of your house there?
I do. Apologies.
I think maybe the high cut filter will sort that out on the edit. um, but anyway, these microphones are incredible. They actually lose such a lot, but it's not losing that. But
I'll close the
what?
window.
Look, no, it's okay. What? Look, maybe it comes down. I can't argue with your logic, but maybe it comes down to simply this: can you hold a 23-year-old Manor Solomon's interest and give him a sense that he's going to get all the opportunities to play first team football and live his dream at Fulham if that's the way we use him? Is he going to be
No.
satisfied with that?
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Is he going to
So
resign?
that's why I wouldn't have thought so. And that's I was putting out as purely, an idea of how we could still get good use out of him without nullifying Willian and Decordova Reid, which I think, both need to be considered in this argument. But you're right. I don't think that he would be happy with that as his role. I think he's better than that. And I think we would be underusing him massively if we only used him off the bench. But I can see that as an option.
But can you imagine you got Bobby in the room at the end of the year or at the end of the season, and you've got Manor Solomon in the room. He's been in England for about 5 minutes. This is all very new to him. He's had a massive injury and setback. He's come out of a war zone. He's had a difficult 6 months. By all accounts, I was listening to an interview with an Israeli journalist that was on Cottage Talk last week. I think his name is Uri Levy. It's really interesting. He was talking about how nice a young man Manor Solomon is, and how committed a professional athlete he is, and he's ambitious. He's always wanted to play in the Premier League, and I think there's going to be a lot of people tapping him on the shoulder and saying, "You're a Champions League football." He's already been successful at Champions League level, right? So he's proving in very small moments that he's got the quality to score goals in the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got the two of these players sitting in a room and having negotiations about contract extensions. I'm saying that if you played Bobby, purely from a man management perspective, if Bobby was your impact sub, I think Bobby re-signs and he'd be happy with that. I don't think he's going anywhere. Manor Solomon, I'd be anxious about whether that would be perceived as enough and filling his cup.
I think that's fair. And, Decordova Reid has already had his contract extended out to the end of next season. So he's locked in. So it is on Solomon at this point. It'd be interesting to see how we manage him for the rest of the season, because I think we do need to give him more game time to make sure that he stays at Fulham. I think if we don't give him the game time, we can't promise anything to him, and he won't want to come.
I bet you this is a really difficult situation for Marco Silva. Doesn't want to mess with the system, which is working so well. And he's saying to Manor, "Oh, geez, I'm really concerned about your knee, Manor. Not sure about your fitness. I want to ease you." I bet you he's managing it really, really carefully.
I'd say it's even harder than that for him, because I'd say he's going, shit, I've got, one of the best players in my squad. I can't put in the team at the moment because the team's playing too well. How do I get this bloke in?
Yeah. And everyone dreams about having those sort of riches and wonderful problems to solve, but it actually becomes a really difficult squad management problem because you're upsetting players who deservedly should be playing first team football and they want to. It's not like, and that's where Kearney's a bit different. He's kind of getting towards the end of his career. He's had a lot of injuries, and I think he's sort of made his peace with the fact that perhaps
He understands his
That's
role a lot better than, and his role is a lot
he's
more
10, 11
defined
years
because of
older.
his age as well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so he's probably very happy. He's probably body wise, probably feeling, wow, if I can, have to play no more than 30 minutes or 40 minutes in the Premier League every week, this is my dream job because I can have
And
high impact.
yeah,
Go on.
exactly. No, I was going to echo what you were saying. He comes off the bench and does a job, and he does it really well at a Premier League level.
Yeah.
But he doesn't fully fit the system we currently play and what we need from him. Um, so he's perfect as a bench player, and I think he understands that. And he could go to a different club and play a role that he'd prefer at a different club. But I think he loves Fulham. He's been there for such a long time now. Um, I think he's very happy in the position he's in coming off the bench, and he played up until his injury. He featured in every single game of the season. So it's a different story though. But we do have quite a few questions, so I will move on to the next one. Um, from Ash Fisher Wolford, Ash W Wolford on Twitter, with Brentford in mind and how important this is as an away game. Not just the fact that they're a better side than Wolves, but also for the fact that it will be an intense game. Do we drop Palhinha for this game to save him from suspension? Ash says, in my head, no matter what, he's missing the Arsenal game. Dad, I did obviously cut off the conversation we were having before this about Palhinha being potentially rested. I've seen quite a few different opinions on this. Interested on yours. What would you do, considering with 24 games played, if he collects one card in the next 8 games, he is out for 2. What would you do?
Well, I think we can all safely agree that it's going to happen.
Yeah,
It's
realistically,
based on the chances of it not happening are pretty slim.
He's picked up on average a card every 2.5 games so far this season.
And what's worrying is that he's a marked man. They're looking for him now. And last week was good evidence of that. It was a pretty harsh yellow card. It looked, from the long shot lens, it didn't look great. But when you actually examine what happened, he obviously made contact with the man, but it wasn't. His 2-footed challenge didn't make contact with the man. Can I say that in a way that doesn't sound terrible?
No, absolutely.
It looked awful, but it was actually pretty benign. But unfortunately, he's a marked man, and what I think is probably completely irrelevant. I think what we're trying to work out is what is Silva going to do, and does Silva put out his best team in the hope that we just continue to collect points. Back to our original conversation we were having about sitting in 6th position somewhat falsely at the moment. Do you keep running ahead of the pack, collecting points and putting them under pressure to come at you? Or do you try and tactically preserve Palhinha for what you think are going to be 6-pointers and really, really important games down in the near future? Whew. I think, Jen, if we asked that question before the break, I think the answer, the transfer window, the answer would be very, very different. Now that we've got Lukic, even though we haven't seen him, there must be a growing sense of comfort that he can do a job. In his very, very brief cameo a couple of weeks ago, he looked pretty sharp, didn't he? He looked like he knew what he was doing.
And he's had a couple of weeks under his belt since then as well.
Yeah. So there's every sense that he can absolutely. He's not a Chalabar. He's a much more skilled, proven commodity than what we had as a backup before. So I think the risk now, or the impact rather, of a Palhinha missing a game or two, which is heavy and brutal for us, but Palhinha missing 2 games, I don't think we're as exposed as we were a couple of months ago. And maybe not that I'm wishing it, but maybe we can deal with it. Maybe the impact is not going to be anywhere near as great as it would have been prior to January.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. For me, I would just put out your best 11 at all times. He's likely to pick up the card. I don't think you tell him to ease off, but at the end of the day, we're not going to protect him from getting a card for 8 games.
No,
If you look at how he's picked up some of the yellow cards as well, he's been booked for celebrating with fans, which was outrageous. He's been booked for making very good tackles, like the one at Brighton, where he completely got the ball, got the man a little bit late, but really it was a good tackle. Um, if he just plays his natural game, he's going to pick up cards. And like you said, he is a bit of a marked man. So I think you just play him as long as you can. When we lose him, we put Lukic in, and hopefully Lukic does a good job. I was impressed by the little I've seen of him so far, but I think I think we just have to keep picking up points and play him in games. There's no point in resting him for Wolves because Lukic comes in and you know we can't guarantee that we're going to pick up points, and we do need points against Wolves. I think I know we're saying save them for the Arsenal game or save them for the Brentford game, but it's more important to not drop points against Wolves than it is to not drop points against Brentford. Because if you drop points against Wolves, and then you also drop points against Brentford because they're up and around us, they're a team close to us in the league. Why wouldn't you make sure you win the games against the teams miles below you? And then chance your hand against the teams around you, hoping that you're of a similar standard and you could pull off a victory. I just think you have to play Palhinha at every possible chance you have. I think we're not going to be able to rest him for 8 games and avoid those cards. And maybe it's a fact. We make a bit more of a point of giving Lukic more minutes beforehand, knowing that Palhinha will be missing at some point soon. We try and blood him into the team a little bit more often and maybe bring off Palhinha. If let's say we're 2-0 up against Wolves, you bring off Palhinha after 60 minutes and give Lukic a proper run out in that team so that he starts to settle and understand how we play.
perfect. Yeah, that would be a very, very good outcome. And let's hope against lesser oppositions we get the opportunity to have that before he blows up. And I think to sort of round this out, I think we're in agreement that you play your best side, but the most important point is that in predicting what Marco is going to do, I think Marco plays his best side every time, and then
100%.
he manages the fallout, and if he can successfully introduce, gradually introduce Lukic in, that's perfect.
And maybe in fact, Palhinha having a 2-game ban as of next week, for example, is better than Palhinha having a 2-game ban right at the crunch time at the end of the season, or come 32 games or that sort of marker where you've got games that you really do need to win because you're keeping up with that European chase. And actually, you want Palhinha to be available for those games and not so much the games that are happening now. If we don't have Palhinha for Brentford at Arsenal, I think that's actually not the worst result in the world, because I think those are 2 games where we potentially be looking at dropping points anyway, especially Arsenal. You expect Arsenal will beat us in that game. So why not have Palhinha and see if you can nick it without him? It's a tough one, but I think Marco, like we both said, Marco will go with his best 11. Looking to the next question, this is Alex in our Fulham WA chat. What's your preference, win the FA Cup or qualify for the Champions League?
Well, I know we both responded both.
Porque no los dos, yeah. Why not have both?
Yeah. I don't know. I think we've discussed this quite a bit. As we progressed down the FA Cup, we're getting close to the point where anything can happen, and with a bit of luck, we see ourselves, with Wembley in sight. I know that's pretty big talking, but it's not far off.
I think it's only 4 games from where we're at now.
Yeah. So would we love a cup run right to Wembley? Oh, of course we would. It also gives us and a win in on that occasion obviously gives us a European spot
Europa
as well,
League.
right?
Yeah. Mm.
Um, I mean, Champions League, that's a dream that is probably a, it's a couple of leaps away at the moment still. It's by no means an easy achievement from where we sit right now. You know,
Mm.
Jack and Sam and I have all done the Premier League calculation. What's that thing called? Where you
I can't remember the exact name of it, but
a table
um,
calculator, the
it's
Premier League
basically a
table
table
calculator.
calculator. Yeah.
Yeah, where you actually now go and speculate as to what the results might be and see where you end up. And you know, I don't think anyone in their right, sensible mind, without 10 beers under their belt, is going to pick Fulham to finish third or even fourth. You know, um, so that's difficult. I picked us at sixth, by the way. I'll put that out there. Um, but would we love a Champions League spot? Of course we would. But I don't know that that's a realistic preference at the moment, which is something that is in our gift.
It's actually a really good question, and it's a bit of a throwaway. What would you rather, win the FA Cup or qualify for the Champions League? But if you break it down, you win the FA Cup, you get in Europe. It's great. We've got a piece of silverware which we don't have in our trophy cabinet at the moment, barring the Intertoto Cup. So would be great to win the FA Cup and get that in and get to Europe. The interesting thing about the Champions League is the quality of players you can attract skyrockets because you offer those guys what everyone is searching for, which is Champions League football. And it would be, I mean, not just the fact that we'd be playing the Champions League and playing the best teams in Europe, it's actually the fact that we have the doors slammed wide open for us to pick up some of these incredible players from around the world who want to play in the Champions League and at the highest level. And the fact is now, if you finish fourth in the Premier League, you automatically go into the group stages. You used to go into qualifying for the Champions League, which is very easy to get knocked out of. Now you go straight into the group stages, so you're guaranteed 6 games in the Champions League. And we've seen what Fulham can do, a side that I would say is a legendary Fulham side, but probably not as good as the current Fulham side. We saw how far they went in Europe, beating incredible teams like Shakhtar, Wolfsburg, Juventus. You know, it's anything can happen when you get into the Champions League. So it's a really interesting one, and I'd probably pick Champions League just for that, because I think once you get into the Champions League, doors open that don't open if you're in the Europa League. Obviously, getting into the Europa League would be great, and you would attract some good players to the club. But Champions League, the money there is outrageous and insane. The quality of players, though, I think that's what would really tip it for me, because I think we'd pick up some absolute gems, and all of a sudden, you're not even having this conversation about Solomon anymore, because he is obviously staying with us because you're playing Champions League football. And
Sure,
you know, what more does he want? He wants to play in the Premier League. Every player who plays in the Premier League wants to play in the Champions League as well. So it just makes sense.
sure. I guess
But
to
you know, take
look
either happily.
to qualify to qualify my answer, and I think you did yours. I sort of took this question as not in your dream, as you close your eyes, what would you rather have? I'm thinking more from the perspective of from where we sit,
Mm.
what would I rather go for, and what is actually realistically achievable.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's realistically achievable is the FA Cup. Champions League is probably out of our reach at the moment, but it's just crazy the fact that we can be having this conversation about either of them, considering last
Mm,
year we were in the Championship and at the start of the season we weren't 100% sure we'd be safe this year. So anyway, great question from Alex there.
mm.
Danny Baker FFC on Twitter. Do you think Mitro's form at the moment, as he hasn't scored in a while and currently has a slight injury, is anything to worry about? And who in our squad would be a backup as after the Brighton game, Bobby for me couldn't do a job, although he gave it a good try. I think we've sort of covered this one already. Do we think the injury is anything to worry about, though?
What's interesting is that we thought Mitro was carrying an ankle in and around the World Cup and after it, and I suspect he probably was because he looked off. And Mitro is a bit injury prone, so it's always a bit of a concern. I know he's considered to be one of the guys. He's probably the strongest one in the squad. He's always quoted as hanging around the gym, and I know he works out, so he looks after his body. But soft tissue injuries like that, not that Mitro is explosive out of the blocks. Every sportsman needs, healthy hamstrings, and they are that kind of injury that tend to be reoccurring, particularly as players get older. And you start getting muscles which are pretty gnarly and a bit torn up and very, very vulnerable to re-injury. And I think it is a concern. And you never really know the full picture of what players are truly carrying. This could have been around for a while, and then he's obviously injured it in the warm up 2 games ago, but he played through it. And now they've benched him, or not actually benched him. They've actually put him into rehab. So I think, look, it is a concern that we clearly do not have a fully functioning equivalent to Mitro. Notwithstanding Bobby, that was a experiment that didn't go well, and Silver's admitted that, and everyone picked it. So that's really unlikely to happen again. So now we have, I think everyone's pretty comfortable that it's going to be Vinicius on the basis that Mitro's still receiving treatment. And is that a concern? Yeah, it is a concern. I think we've given appropriate levels of praise to Vinicius for what he's brought in a couple of enormous moments this season, and one which probably takes him into the gallery of cult hero at Fulham against Chelsea. But and his hold-up play has been good, so it allows us to continue playing in the style that we do with a looky-likey of Mitro up front. But his finishing is obviously nowhere near the quality. He's just doesn't seem to have the goals in him from open play. Maybe he's a better penalty taker than Alexander Mitrovic. Who knows?
Watch him score a hat-trick on the weekend after you said that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be so good? But yeah, it is a concern, to answer the question. It is a concern because whilst we have 12 goal scorers in our team, Mitro on fire. Look, if Mitro was really on fire from now to the end of the season, maybe Champions League could be a thing. Seriously, he's that good.
Yeah. We need to keep moving because we're running very long today.
Sure.
But look, like you said, the form and injury are slight worries. I'm less worried about the form than I am about the injury. I think Mitro is a top quality striker, scored over 100 goals for Fulham. He'll keep scoring goals for us. It's a dry patch. Strikers have dry patches. I think he'll come back good. I think the injury is a little bit of an issue, but I think if we rest it, I'd rather him rest it. He probably won't play against Wolves. He probably also won't play against Leeds. That gives him till the 7th of March from today, which is almost, well, it's because he didn't play last week. He'll have 3 to 3.5 weeks rest. I think that should be enough to get him up for the Brentford game and then the Arsenal game that follows and the Liverpool game that follows that. I'd rather have him for those 3 than push him to try and get out for the Wolves and the Leeds games. And as you said, I think we've got Vinicius going up front every time. Even though he's not Mitro, he's better than Bobby as a striker, and I think he's given a fairly good account of himself a couple of times, and I think he's worth persisting with. And the fact that he's probably going to get a run of a couple of games now will do him a world of good as well. On to our last question. This is a bit of a silly one, and this is the one I won't call it silly because William's a very regular listener to the podcast. William asks, who would win in a cage fight between our respective mascots, Billy the Badger, or I don't even know what the Wolves mascot is called, but he's a wolf. I did ask Sam because I know that this one was definitely for Sam. Sam's comment, well, firstly, he didn't know who Fulham's mascot actually was, which is poor from Sam. Sam said, I feel like a wolf could F up a badger, but it's between two people. If it's between two people in suits, I'd back Billy the Badger every time. So, yeah, Dad, who wins in a cage match?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, look, if it's two men, I'd back Fulham, but yeah, good question nonetheless, William. Thank you. I haven't seen William, unfortunately, on today's podcast, but I'm sure he'll listen again at some point soon. So, look, it's been a long one today, but there's been a lot to discuss with a really big game coming up and some really good questions from our listeners. Oh, what's that? Oh, my phone's just started going off. Yeah, look, really enjoyed this one, talking through the Wolves game. I'm really looking forward to this game. It's going to be a tough one to get up for, with it being, I think, a 4 a.m. start for us here in Perth, but it might be worth getting up for, seeing as it's Saturday morning the next day. So, yeah, Dad, thank you for joining us on this one.
Yeah, pleasure. Good. It's I'm trying to work out what the right formula is for keeping this under an hour, and whether it's 2 or 3. It doesn't seem to have an impact. We always seem to have such a lot to talk about, but I really enjoyed it.
Seem to go longer with 2 than we do with 3, which is interesting. But there's like we said, there's just so much to talk about, and you know, when things are going well, there's even more to talk about because it's just enjoyable. But look, thank you to everyone. Just a quick mention to everyone who sent in questions, to everyone who's listened along on the live stream and joined in today. Thank you very much. Our last few episodes of the podcast have been our most successful yet, and we really appreciate all the support. If you do enjoy the podcast, please make sure you do like and subscribe to it. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Twitch, and then the podcast is also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere you get your podcasts. So look,
please share it with your friends.
Absolutely. We really appreciate all the support, and we'd love to keep this growing as well. We've gone from having about 50 followers on Twitter to just shy of 300 now, and a couple of hundred subscribers to the podcast who listen in fairly regularly. So we do really appreciate all the support, and please do keep sharing our content because it means a lot to us, and it's the reason we do it as well. So look, until next time, good luck to Fulham on Friday night, and let's try and get ourselves a win and push ourselves past that 40-point mark into European contention. And come on, you Whites.